Today we're going to key a hex. Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall. Today we're sitting at the computer and we're going to walk through a practical example on a current Sandbox campaign that I'm building, and we're going to build out some points of interest for one of the hexes on the map, and hopefully that'll give you an example on how I go about keying these different hexes and providing these different exploration areas for my players to check out. We'll use a couple of resources that are freely available online, so hopefully that gives you some good fodder and ideas to go about building your own hexes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into keying a hex. Okay, so here we are on the hex map. We are going to be looking at hex 0404 today. As you can see, it is a lake region with some forest around it. If you don't have a map already made and you're starting completely from scratch, there are tables in the resources I'm going to include that let you roll to randomly determine the terrain of the hex. But because I've already built this map out and I kind of predetermined what the terrain is going to be, we're going to skip over that in this case. As we can see, we have these lakes, which are going to be a pretty big feature in the hex, and is a pretty nice, easy place to start in terms of our first point of interest. Okay, we're back over in the software where I capture my notes from my campaigns. In this case, I use the software Notion. There are a lot of great choices out there. You could use Obsidian or OneNote or even Google Docs. Whatever works for you, just go ahead and use that. And essentially, I have different kind of databases that control different elements of my campaign. So hex locations, characters, locations like dungeons or sub-locations. So let's go ahead and jump over to the hex locations database here in this case. So each hex is going to have its own page within this database. You can click on them to open them up. In this case, we are interested in hex 0404. That's what we're going to key today. I've already given it a name. I like to give my hexes names. Usually it comes from inspiration as I'm keying out the hex itself. I'll leave the name to the end and then I'll give it that based off of the content I've generated for it. But in this case, there's the two obvious lakes that are showing on the picture, and in this case I've just called them the mirrored lakes. So I capture a lot of different information, so I include a little picture of the hex and the neighboring hexes. I can click on the different hexes here, so if the players are exploring and moving from 0404 to one of the neighboring ones, I can click on it here and pull that information right up. So then we have hex details, so you can include stuff here like your random encounter tables, rumors, and other information that you might want to include, things like characters or factions that are prevalent in the hex. We're not going to go too much into that today. We're going to focus mostly on keying out the points of interest. So in this case, I like to have 1 to 3 points of interest in my hexes. If you look at guidance from a lot of hex maps or procedurally generated hex crawling for sandboxes, they'll have you roll a die, maybe like a D6 or a D8, and then on a 1 there will be a point of interest there. To me, that's just far too few. I don't want to have a bunch of hexes on my map. I just think that's a little bit of a waste. I'd rather have the players slowly crawl through and find lots of good, densely packed stuff. So I like to have 1 to 3. That's totally personal preference. You can have 0 if you want in your hex and have it more sparsely populated like the Old Wisdom. But in this case, I kind of follow the ideas of like Neverland or the Dark of Hot Springs Isle, which have a lot of kind of densely packed hexes. In this case, we already have kind of one default point of interest, which is those lakes, right? These are the mirrored lakes. This is a huge landmark in the hex, so it's nice to have kind of a landmark feature in your hexes, something that the players can see. Obviously it's there, they can interact with it however they'd like. We're gonna have to think a little bit about what we want to include at the lakes or what the lakes are all about. I'm going to key 2 other points in this one, so we're going to have 3 points here because this is a tutorial on how we go about keying hexes. We might as well do a few examples. Now that we are focused on the point of interest, let's look at the resources that we're going to use to try to key out these different areas. The first is Worlds Without Number by Kevin Crawford. I've talked a lot about this on my channel. You can get the free PDF from DriveThruRPG. It has most of the book in it. There's a deluxe version of the book as well. I have the deluxe version. I really like it, but the free one has a lot of the tools in it. And you can just download that and try it out first before going paid if that's what you want to do. The second one is this tool set called Wilderness Hexcrawl. It uses a lot of the old Judges Guild material, uses some of the pieces from the different books there. It's kind of been compiled into this PDF, and then you can find it for free online. I'll include the link in the video description. For this first point of interest, the lakes, because we already know what they are, they're the lakes, I'm going to start with Worlds Without Number, and I'm going to roll on this to get some idea on what might be interesting about the lakes. So I'm going to jump over to a section called the Wilderness section, the Wilderness tags. And if I just scroll down here, there is these Wilderness tags. And the idea is you roll a D100. Usually you roll twice to get 2 tags, but you can roll as many times as you'd like. And then you try to sort of blend those different ideas together on what the point of interest might be. Let me go ahead and roll, and I'll just relay what those numbers are, and we'll see what they are, okay? First, we have a 66, which is Perilous Path, okay? And then second, we have a 61. So that is Outsider Enclave. Okay, interesting. Let me think about this. So here's Outsider Enclave. Give some ideas on what you might want to use associated with that tag. And then, yeah, Perilous Path there. Let me think about this for a second, and then I will come back with some ideas. I've thought about it a little bit, and what I've kind of come up with is in my game, my campaign, I have sort of a lot of connections to what I'm calling these primordial beings. So these are like archfey or elemental lords or demon lords or demon princes, whatever, you know, if you're looking at the kind of this bog standard D&D tropes. So in this case, I think those are our outsiders, right? Somehow they are connected to these lakes. And to me, Perilous Path says that these creatures, the primordials in this case, in my campaign, they've kind of left this mortal world and they've retreated to their own domain. And the idea is that the players can travel to them to explore them and treat with these primordials or whatever. The path in this case is, it must be a connection, right? They must be able to travel from the lake somehow to these other planes of existence to meet with these different creatures. So there's 2 lakes here in this case. So that tells me that maybe there are 2 primordials that the players could entreat with or travel to their lands to explore and learn more about. Switching over to our point of interest, I wrote out a few things here already. We'll just kind of walk through that. So the mirrored lakes are kind of seeped in this ancient magic from the time when the primordials lived here. These 2 primordials use these lakes as sort of these conduits to make their own realms and escape the fracturing. And as a result, these lakes that survived have this kind of innate connection to those planes. And I just kind of named them there. We have Lycander, who is kind of associated with dreams, and Linnell, who's this primordial that has kind of an enchantress type bent to her, right? So we have 2 lakes, so I named them. So we have the Mesmerizing Lake, which is associated with Linnell, the enchantress, makes sense, and the Dreaming Lake. So because we want these players to be able to travel to these realms, and we're dealing with kind of these primordial beings, I think there should be some sort of bargain. They have to give something up in order to be able to travel. They have to make some sort of offering or sacrifice, very kind of thematic and tropey within fantasy. So in this case, because they're called the Mirrored Lakes, I decided just to use kind of similar ideas between the 2, but have a few differences in flavor mostly. The players need to give some sort of offering up. In the case of the Mesmerizing Lake, this is the one that is associated with our enchantress type figure. The players need to go to the center of the lake and cast an object in that accentuates or admires one's beauty, like a mirror or a piece of jewelry, and we give a value amount to it in order to make it be some sort of true cost to the players. And as a result, we'll have a creature appear and entreat with the players. I chose a Nereid. Nereids are kind of a fey aquatic beings that are also sort of associated with kind of charms. The Nereid will appear and they'll inquire to the party, are they looking for knowledge or transportation? We focus mostly on the transportation aspect, right? We rolled up the perilous path on the wilderness tags, but I think it would be cool to give the players an option, maybe give them the ability to look for information. And in this case, the information is going to be pertained to the Enchantress, Linnell, or her realm. So the players could ask some questions. You could set a limit on that, like maybe 1d4, 1d6. So they can ask a few questions before the Nereid leaves, and then, you know, they have to make another offering. If they choose transportation, the Nereid can open up some sort of magic portal, and the players can travel through that. On the Dreaming Lake, very similar. In this case, the object's different. So we're casting in black pearls into the depths, and we have a different messenger. We have a huge prismatic scaled fish. So because this is associated with kind of like dreams and dreaming, I wanted something a little bit more wild, a little bit more alien, something kind of weird. In this case, it'll communicate telepathically. You could have it speak if you wanted. That'd be weird too. I'm sure that happens in people's dreams. But same thing, they can ask for knowledge or transportation, in this case, about the other primordial. And if they wish to travel to the land, in this case, the fish will open its mouth and the players have to get inside, and it'll close and it'll swim off to the dreaming land. So that's a little bit more trippy, a little bit more weird, and the players might be a little bit apprehensive about doing that. But I think it's fun. I think it's flavorful. Pretty cool. Now, the one thing here that you'll notice is these are interesting and fun, but there's not a lot of information here yet about like how would the players know to go to the center of the lake to make these offerings and talk to these beings. So that's where we're going to tie in some rumors. We need to think about what other locations or hexes nearby that could have information or offer ideas about, you know, this is an option for the players to find out and go and travel to these strange realms or learn a bit more about them. One other thing I think we could do, they may not find those rumors, right? Because they could be fixed or found in a location where they haven't explored yet. One thing I think we could do is give some sort of telegraphing here so the players might be able to figure this out or at least interact with these messengers in another manner, maybe giving it some sort of condition, like for the Dreaming Lake, maybe at nighttime, under a full moon, or just at nighttime, whatever you want. Maybe they can see sort of prismatic glimmers flashing near the kind of the waters if they're looking out at the lake at night, showing the harbinger of this kind of prismatic fish that's out there. Something that gives the players an option to see these things happening, but under certain conditions, not just fully given. All right, let's move on to our second point of interest. I'm over on our other free resource here, the Wilderness Hexcrawl. I've jumped to page 8, this Wilderness Exploration page 8. So I'm going to roll a d10 here. I got an 8. So this is a temple or a shrine. Okay. All right, I've jumped over to the temples and shrines section of the document, and we're going to go ahead and roll on some of these tables here. So I'm not going to roll on the configuration. I like to just pull maps from other sources like Dyson Logos or free ones online. It just saves me some time. But let's get a sense of the size of it maybe and the conditions. So I'm going to roll a couple d10s here to get some context. So for size, we have 1 story and the temple is 6, so ancient. Okay, so this is an old temple. So maybe associated with the early kind of ages of the humans or demi-humans that inhabited the area. Okay, so there's a lot of good other tables here that you can use if you're starting from scratch or whatever. In this case, I'm gonna skip over some of them because I don't think they make sense with the context that we're looking at. Like, what it's built of doesn't matter too much to me. The location we've already determined, it's kind of in the wilderness, so we don't really need to roll here for location. And then it's probably by the lake or in the woods. So we haven't decided that yet exactly, but rolling on this table probably doesn't make a lot of sense. In terms of leadership, so you can roll to see, is there a high priest there and how many other priests, things like that. Because this is an ancient temple and it's out in the wilderness, I don't think that it makes a lot of sense to maybe even have any sort of priesthood there. I'm not going to roll on that one. In terms of wealth, I'm going to leave that out for now. Maybe we'll roll to see what sort of creature layers there. Getting to the shrine type, let's roll what the shrine is. 3. So it's a sacred stone. Okay, interesting. And let's see what type of stone it is. Rolling on the sacred stone table. We got a 5, so it's a sacrificial stone. Okay, so maybe this is it could be a temple to some more of a dark deity. Okay, so our shrine type is a sacred stone and it is a sacrificial stone. Let's get a little bit more detail on who the deity or entity is that is kind of being worshipped here. Maybe it's ancient, so maybe this is kind of obscured now, but let's try to get some information. So rolling primary aspect. 2, it's a god. Okay, we can roll on the aspects here. So let's roll 3d20, I guess, to get information on the aspect and 2 descriptions for it. So rolling its aspect, 11, it is an elf, okay? And description 1 is 19 and 14. So inspiring stone-like skin. Interesting. Okay, so an elf that's inspiring and stone-like skin. Let's also roll on the miracles in boons table. I think it makes sense if the players are going to make some sort of sacrifice, maybe they should get something in trade for that. So let's roll a d20 and see what we get. I got a 13, so showers treasure on faithful. Okay, interesting. So there's a lot of other great information here in this table, as you can see. So you could roll for sphere of influence, the deity's might, the nature of the temple's larger religion. I'm not going to roll on these. I feel like I have enough. You can generate its name if you need to make a name for it. If you want some sort of effect for defiling the temple, you could roll that up in the duration of the curse. I'll figure out what makes sense for the guardian to be. And then there's stuff on like ceremonies and stuff like that. But since for me, this is a kind of an ancient ruined temple, there's probably no ceremonies going on, but lots of good stuff there that you could figure out. We will make one last roll, and why don't we roll on the ceremonial offerings table, since we have that kind of sacrificial table. Might make sense to have some sort of effect there. So let's go ahead and roll on that to see what we get. I got a 7, so they can sacrifice small gems and they will get something in return. Let me go ahead and write something up on the points of interest and we'll see what we need to flesh out from there. Okay, I'm back. So I wrote up the second point of interest for us. We have this ancient shrine of Gaia. Gaia is one of the main gods or goddesses in my game. This was an ancient temple or shrine. It had this kind of stone-like elf figure that was sort of the statue being depicted, and the main central feature, the main shrine, was this large sacrificial stone. So I focus on those kind of 2 key aspects. Since it's ancient, I'm kind of thinking that this temple, it was only 1 story and it's really down to kind of like the foundations now. It's kind of crumbled away or mostly been destroyed. So this is going to be harder to find given that it's old, and I decided maybe it makes sense for it to be obscured by brush and trees that have overgrown the area. So players need to actively search the hex in order to find this place. It's not something where I'd make a roll where they're searching and, oh, they only have a certain probability. You could do that if you want. For me, I just want it to be something where they decide we want to explore this area further, and then they'll find it. I did say that maybe we should have some sort of predator or guardian in the temple. I decided to go with 2 large cats. So in this case, I'm using stats of a mountain lion. I just thought it makes sense to have some sort of animal that maybe had moved in and kind of den there. So I went with cats in this case. So they will defend their territory because it is den. So if the players want to explore it further, they might have to deal with these mountain lions. I decided amongst it there would be some old animal and humanoid bones that maybe fell victim to these mountain lions in the past. If the players take time to search through those remains, they can find a few things of use. So there's like an old ceremonial dagger that's worth a little bit of money, and then an old leather scroll case that does have a cleric spell in it. Again, I'm using basic expert, so you have to differentiate the magic type. In this case, it's a detect magic spell for a cleric. And then there's a note in there, and I figured it'd be fun to include some sort of written note about a rumor. I haven't figured out what that'll be. I just have kind of made a note there for now. And I can have that either point to something in the hex or a nearby hex. So that's kind of a cool way to think about it. Just try to sprinkle those rumors or hooks in where you can. And I felt like this was a good place to fit it in. Now more to the details of the actual location. So as I said, we have those two main features, the statue and the sacrificial stone. In this case, we have kind of the description of the stone based off of what I rolled up. I largely kept that the same. The players might be interested in the statue being one of the central features that remain. And if they decide to clean it up, they can find some script written at the bottom. And this offers a clue to our sacrificial stone. And I just wrote this little kind of cryptic message out. So, to Gaia, precious stones bestowed, shall a richer boon unfold. Then to the sacrificial stone. So we rolled this up. The idea here was players have to sacrifice something and they get something in return. We rolled up that they would sacrifice small gems and they would get like treasure showered upon them. I took some liberties in modifying that. So I decided that I'd want it to be just a value amount of gems. They have to use at least 1,000 worth of GP of gems. And if they sacrifice that, then they will be conferred their blessings. The stone itself is kind of this large stone table, and I kind of picture it as like having this bowl-like depression, kind of like a mortar. And then there is a large stone pestle that rests on the altar, along with some smaller stone jars and lids. And so that should kind of help give the players an idea of how they might have to sacrifice something. And a further clue I included is if they look at the bowl, they'll see kind of like fine glittering dust or powder residue that can be seen within the bowl. So that might help clue them up that they need to like grind up gems or something. And once they do that, once they grind up the right amount of gems, the altar will glow and the powdered jewels will kind of lazily float and filter into one of the stone jars. And then that becomes a potion for them. In this case, it's a dust or a powder. So they have to inhale it rather than drink it. But I used basic expert's potion of treasure finding. So the idea here was they would get more treasure showered upon them. Well, they get this potion so they can use it to find other treasure hoards nearby when they're exploring somewhere else. So that's kind of how I interpreted it. And that's how we got to this small ancient shrine of Gaia. So let's go ahead and key up our third one now. So we're back in the Wilderness Hexcrawl file. I think I'm maybe going to use a combination of the two in this case. We'll start with the Hexcrawl to get a sense of what the feature is, and then maybe we'll go to Worlds Without Numbers and roll up some tags or something and get a little bit of idea on the detail there. So in this case, I'm thinking maybe we want it to be a ruin, a relic, a lair, or a castle. I don't really want any villages, and we already have a shrine. So why don't we just roll a d6 on this first table here and see what we get from one of those three. So I rolled a 3, which is a lurid lair. Okay, so we are over on the lurid lairs section. Let's go ahead and roll up the lair type, and then we can maybe hop over to Worlds Without Number and get a little bit more context on it. So rolling a d8, I got a 3, which is burrows. Okay, interesting. Let's hop over to Worlds Without Number and maybe roll up some tags for it. All right, I'm over in Worlds Without Number. I've jumped to the ruin tag section, and we're going to roll on some ruins here to get a little bit of context for it. You could roll on the wilderness tag section as well if you'd rather go that way, but since we already rolled on that one, we'll roll on this one instead. So we're going to roll 2 D100s to get a couple of tags. We got a 14, which is Cyclical Doom, and 76, which is Religious Zealots. Okay, very interesting. Okay, I've thought about it for a minute. I read into the details on those tags, and that got me thinking. So I talked about in a past video about regionalizing your hexes. I do have a template that I refer to for this particular region. I wrote it up here. And in that, I wrote a little bit about this idea of these primordial trees that kind of dot the woods, and they're kind of associated with the divine or the gods and some other kind of higher primordial aspects there. So I thought, maybe the burrows could be underneath one of those trees. And because we rolled up those tags, religious zealots, I mean, that's self-explanatory. Maybe they're interested in this tree and some sort of divine aspect. And then cyclical doom, I was a little less familiar with, so I had to look that one up. What Kevin Crawford is saying is there's a phenomenon in the ruin that makes it dangerous at certain intervals. So this being a tree, maybe there are different times of the year where maybe it's giving off some sort of sap or pollen that is dangerous to a lot of people, but maybe it's interesting to these religious zealots and they want it for some reason. Maybe we can draft up some ideas about that. So I'm going to go ahead and key up something really quick there, and then I'll come back and share with what I got. Okay, I've took a little bit of time to write up some ideas for this last point of interest. We have this burrow where there's some sort of cyclical effect going on, and these religious zealots that are involved. So I talked a little about those trees that I have that are located in this part of my hex map. They're called Verdian trees. So the burrow I decided would be located underneath one of these large trees. So as I mentioned, the tree is sort of the symbol, ancient symbol of the gods, and is said to have these mysterious powers. So I decided the trees would have this strange sap that looked like mercury that would kind of weep out of the trees each spring. And that sap is what is said to have the powers of the oracular. But consuming too much of it can cause madness. And actually, I decided even being in close proximity to that sap for prolonged periods of time can have detrimental effects. So kind of almost like radioactive sap. That sort of plays into that cyclical doom tag we have. So then I decided, how do we involve these religious zealots? Well, maybe there were a group of religious scholars or pilgrims that came to the mirrored lakes in hopes of studying one of the trees and collecting some of its sap. They weren't aware of those detrimental effects and the prolonged exposure. And as a result, those that have kind of survived have become more crazed and addicted to this substance, and they've sort of received these visions, and they believe that the sap is some sort of key to immortality. And now they're doing all they can to sort of harvest from the tree these sap. So they've moved into a portion of this burrow at the base of the tree, and they're working on some sort of plan to get more sap out of the tree. So that led me to a couple of hook ideas. Maybe if their plan succeeds, that could have ecological effects on the hex or nearby areas. And maybe the players could receive some sort of divine vision to intervene to save the tree from destruction. So what I would go from here is I would find a map or make a map that I would want to use as kind of the burrows underneath the tree. I'd maybe look at Donjon and roll up one of the cavern type maps there, or look at Dyson logos to see if anything would quite fit the bill. And based on that, I would go about keying that like a normal dungeon. It's kind of up to you on how long you would want this to be. It could be 5 rooms, you could have it 10 rooms or 20 rooms, and sort of key it up from there. I'm not going to go through and keep the map. This video is long enough already. Maybe if people are interested, we could go through a keying the dungeon type video, but for now I'm going to leave it here and I'll work on this point of interest on my own. But hopefully that gives you some ideas. That is kind of the 3 points of interest that we made out for the hex. So you have kind of these 3 different areas that your players can explore, learn a bit more about. You can have more rumors that point to it or rumors that point elsewhere. You'll have your encounter tables that can hopefully enrich and provide more context to the different points of interest that you have within the hex. So that's pretty much it. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. It really does help the channel out a lot. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Check out my monthly newsletter, Enchanted Nimbus. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you again soon.